Welcome. Thank you for joining us for First Person Conversations with Holocaust Survivors. My name is Bill Benson. I have hosted the museum's First Person program since it began in 2000. Thank you for joining us today. Through these monthly conversations, we bring you firsthand accounts of survival of the Holocaust. Each of our first person guests serves as a volunteer at the museum. We are honored to have Holocaust survivor Nat Shaffir share his personal account of the Holocaust with us. Nat, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to be our first person this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm honored to be here and share with you some of my personal experiences as to what happened to me and my family during the Holocaust.
Nat, you have so much to share with us. We'll get started right away if you don't mind. You were born in Romania in December 1936, less than 3 years before the start of World War II in September 1939. Please begin by telling us about your family and your community in the years leading up to the start of the war.
Both my parents were born in small villages in eastern part of Hungary, which is called now Transylvania. My mother was the oldest of 12 children, and my father was the youngest of 7. In 1924, about a year after World War I ended, my father and 2 of his older brothers decided to leave home and move to Romania, where they settled in a farm community named Bucium, and they started a dairy farm. Before long, they were very successful because due to the fact that the biggest customer was the Romanian army.
Mm-hmm.
He was the youngest of the 3 brothers. He was not married. The other 2 brothers were already married. So he decided it's time for him to get married at a certain point. And the most logical place to find a bride at those days was for someone to go back to a village one came from.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1930, he went back to Hungary, found a girl, married her about a week later. He stayed in that village for approximately another 8 days, and then they boarded a train to go back to Bucium, to the farm. Before long, 3 children were born, 2 girls and a boy. My older sister was born in 1934. I was born in 1936, and my younger sister, which I still call my little sister, was born in 1938. Here we have a photo. Yeah,
Tell us
sorry.
about this picture, if you don't mind, Nat.
Here we have the picture of myself, my sister, and my mother and my aunt. My mother is above me. Looks like I was about 2 years old there. My mother and her sister, that was her next in line from the sister. She was the 1 year younger than my sister was, must have come to visit us at the farm. And then below that is my younger sister, Sarah. So she's in front of my aunt, Hannah, which, by the way, perished in Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to her was that she actually could have survived. But when she came off from a train, from the cattle cars, she saw a little baby sitting on the ground crying. And she picked him up and she held him on her arms. And the Nazis thought that this was her child. And she was moved from one section of the selection process to the other. And she was immediately put to death in the gas chamber.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Nat. Your other sister, Lily, I believe, was born in what, 1938?
Yes.
Yeah. Nat, your father and his 2 brothers operated this dairy farm. Tell us more about the farm.
This was a big farm, a little bit grown, and it was probably they were the largest farm in that area at that point. And my father was able to secure the Romanian army as a customer. Now, each individual brother dealt with a different portion of the operation of the farm. The older brothers dealt primarily with the milk production and the cheese and the butter production. My father was pretty much like the salesperson. So all in all, they were very successful.
And tell us more about the community of Bucium itself, where your farm was located, and what was your parents' relationship like with Christian neighbors in that particular community?
The community in general was a small community, but about approximately 100 to 125 families. There were approximately 25 Jewish families in that community. My father dealt with the Gentile farmers the same way as he dealt with the Jewish farmers. He helped many of them anytime they needed help, usually in droughts. He always helped them with some either money or giving them seed for next year's crop. So the relationship was very, very good. They knew that they can always count on the Spitzer brothers. So my father always went out of his way to help anybody that needed help.
And if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit more about your family at the time. Were you a religious family?
Yeah, we were religious, as you can see, from my father wearing a black hat and having a beard. My mother wearing what they call a sheitel or a wig, because usually religious women do not show their own hair. And obviously myself having a cap. So yes, we were religious. There was a synagogue there, and we practiced religion as we normally would, especially on those little villages from where they came from. Religion was very important to them, and they continued that in that farm in Buchum, which is the farm area.
In 1940, Nat, a new Romanian dictatorship introduced anti-Semitic policies restricting Jewish life in Romania. The country aligned itself with Nazi Germany, joining the Axis powers in November 1940. Please tell us how this impacted Jewish life in Romania.
There were terrible things going on in Romania at certain times of the year. The things were during that period of time in a small village like Buchum, we did not feel that problematic. We did not feel that anti-Semitism. So we were able to continue operating the farm. Also, because my father was dealing with top echelon officers in the Romanian army, they pretty much put out the word, stay away or stay off the Spitzer farm, leave them alone, let them operate. Now that went on for a while, and then after that, it was not, they were completely open.
In fact, in July 1941, Romanian authorities staged a pogrom, which was a violent attack against the Jewish population in the nearby city of Iași, close to Buchum. Can you tell us more about this particular pogrom that took place in Iași?
There were two instances. One was in June of 1941, where people were actually stopped on the streets. And as you can see in here, they were searched, taken away whatever valuables they had. Either they had watches or money with them. And then later on, probably clubbed to death. As you can see in here on the right-hand side, there's three individual soldiers. Really, the middle one is not really a soldier. He's kind of make-believe a soldier. He's in civilian clothes with a cap of a soldier with a big stick. And a lot of people died on that day. About 10,000 people were killed by neighbors strictly for the purpose of because they were Jews and also to take away whatever property value they have. So that's pretty much what we see in that picture, is that people stopped on the street, and eventually probably most of these people that were stopped at this day were killed.
And Nat, of course, our next picture is a particularly significant one. Please tell us about this.
This happened in July of 1941. It's important to remember that the weather in Romania is very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. So this happened in July of 1941, where a trainload of Jews were loaded in Iași and were ferried to Calarași, to the south of Romania, for 3 days back and forth. Once it arrived back after 3 days without food or water in these cattle cars, most of the people on these trains were dead.
Do you know if your family knew about what had taken place in Iași at the time, because they were at the farm in Buchum?
We heard a little bit what was going on about the pogrom, but we didn't know to what extent. News were coming in very I would say, very slow. People that went into Iași, going to the market, would come back with some news or some rumors. So we knew certain things are being done against Jews, but we didn't know to what extent until later on we found out all these pogroms that happened and all these Jews that were killed by neighbors or by the government.
Yeah, and while that was happening in other parts of Romania and nearby in Iași, Was your family able to continue to operate the farm and do the business that they had been doing at that time?
They were doing the business the same way. They did not go to Yash down that often anymore. Actually, they probably after July 1941, I don't think my father ever went back to Yash. He probably would send somebody, one of the farm helps, to buy feed or do whatever needed to do with the farm. So he didn't go back there. So that was one of the things that we continued to operate the farm, but we did not go back to Yash at the point.
Yeah. Nat, before we go on, tell us a little bit about your little boy. What was farm life like for you?
Living on a farm or growing up on a farm was terrific. I mean, it's open fields, animals. It was actually a fantastic feeling. It was a primitive life, but it was a good life. Most of the time, I like to hang out with the farm help. They taught me all kinds of things. At age 5, they taught me how to milk a cow or to ride a horse, which usually doesn't happen to city boys, city kids. So life on that farm for me was great. Yeah, I had some chores that I had to do, but nonetheless was pleasant to do that. So for me, it was a great feeling to grow up on that farm. And I still have farming things in my blood. I still do a lot of gardening at this point as well.
Oh, in fact, if we had the time, I would want the audience to know about your amazing green thumb that continues to this day. Nat, in the fall of 1942, Jewish families from your community, from Buchum, were abruptly forced from their homes and told to move to Socola, a neighborhood in Yash. Tell us what happened to you and your family when that happened.
One of our neighbors was the priest of the town. That priest used to come by once a week to the house and ask my father for a donation for the church and also some dairy products for some of his congregants who could not otherwise afford it. At the time that happened, my father was already there for about 18 years. Never once in these 18 years has my father refused such a request. Until one day, things have changed. The same priest came by, but this time he came with armed police officers and 2 armed soldiers. This never happened before, so we didn't know why this whole group came together. We all came out of the house and we went over to greet him. When we came close to the group, the priest pointing at us and looking at the police officer, and he said, "Estigidans, these are Jews." Now we were turned into the authorities for being Jewish by a priest, the same priest who asked and received help from my father every week for 18 years. The police officer told us we have 4 hours to vacate the farm because he has orders for us to be relocated. My mother, my father, both tried to convince the police officer perhaps they can let us stay. My father told him, "Look, I've known you since you were a child. I know your family." My mother told him, "Look, this is our home. Our children were born here. Can't you just let us stay?" And obviously, he did not. Mm-hmm. So after 4 hours, what do you take? You have a house, things that you managed to have. What do you take in 4 hours? So the first thing we took whatever cash we have in the house, my mother's jewelry. We took some prayer books, Bibles.
And this is one of them, right?
This is one of them. This is actually the Haggadah, which we read during Passover time. And we also took some candlesticks that my mother lit candles every Friday night and every holiday. It's an important story about these candlesticks. These candlesticks were made in 1745 and was actually given to my great-great-great-grandmother. And she, in return, passed her on to her older daughter. And the older daughter passed her on to the next older daughter. So, and eventually got to my mother, which she was the 5th generation. And usually they always gave it to the older daughter. And my mother broke that mold and she gave it these candlesticks to my wife, which is her daughter-in-law. And my wife in return gave those to my younger daughter as a gift, as a wedding present. And she's the one that actually keeps it now and she lights candles over them. So these candles sticks are now 7th generation in the Spitzer family, or they have whatever other last names they have.
And as you noted, they are almost 300 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nat, so you had 4 hours to gather whatever you could take with you in that 4-hour period. How did you journey? How did you gather things and take them with you to Socola? And what was that journey like to this new place that you were being forced to go?
Well, when we heard the news that we have to vacate and relocate, we pretty much at that point knew where we were going. So in addition to all the valuable things, we also took important things that we needed: pillows, blankets, cooking utensils, eating utensils. And after the 4 hours were over, we were escorted to the ghetto area that was developed in July of 1941, right after the pogroms. So once we arrived there, we were turned over to the authorities.
Nat, if I can interrupt for just a second, do you remember what that trip, that 4-hour period and that trip was like for your parents?
Yeah, it was very sad. My mother was crying. The uncertainty, we didn't know exactly what to expect. That pretty much interpreted into as children. We didn't know either. We saw my mother crying. We knew we're not going to a happy place. So things were pretty awful at that point. It took about 3 hours to get from Buchum to Iași, and that was one of the worst times for us anyway. At that point, these 3 hours were terrible feelings about it.
So what did you arrive to in Socola? What were the conditions like for you?
Well, when we arrived there, we were turned over to the authorities, where our names, ages, and gender were taken down on a list. We were given a yellow star that we had to wear on our chest at all times. We were given ration cards for bread and for kerosene. As a living quarters, we were given one room in a house that already housed 4 other families. So there was approximately 25, 28 individuals living under one roof in one house. Terrible noisy. There was a lot of chaos in us when we arrived, because on that day, a lot of Jews were rounded up from the vicinity, from the small towns, from the small villages of Iași, and brought into to the Socola area. In addition to doing all these things, number one, we were told what we can and cannot do. Obviously, we were no longer allowed to go to school. We were told that religion practices is outlawed. Each individual person was given a job, a manual job to do while they're there. So things were was a chaos going on. People were crying, children were screaming. So we didn't know what was going on. So there was such a terrible feeling about it.
Once you were relocated and living in that single room with 28 other people in the small house, what was daily life like for you and your family in Socola? How did your parents manage to get the basic necessities of life, like food, clothing, and heat?
Well, clothing, whatever we bought with us, pretty much lasted for the entire period of time. Once they tore, my mother was sewing them up and keep wearing them. As far as food, we received rations for bread. The ration card called for a quarter of a loaf of bread per person every 2 days, and 5 liters of kerosene once a week. That was used primarily for heating and for cooking. To receive these rations, the bread rations in particular, one had to walk out of the ghetto area to line up at the bakery. To do so, my father told my older sister, who was 2 years older than me, to go out and get the bread rations. So she'd line up and receive the rations and come back. One day, my father found out that there were some hooligans picking on Jewish girls, and he was afraid that something would happen to my sister. So from that day on, he sent me out to get the rations. The same hooligans that picked on Jewish girls also picked on Jewish boys.
Right.
Many times I would come home, all bloody face, beaten up, but that didn't hurt as much as when these hooligans also stole my bread, which meant for the next 2 days, we had nothing to eat. Until my mother realized that this could happen again, So from that point on, she started rationing us from our own rations. In other words, when we received the next ration of a loaf and a quarter, she removed one slice of bread. 2 days later, she removed another slice. So we had 2 slices until she accumulated the entire loaf of bread. And when these hooligans took my bread again, at least we had something reserved to eat.
Unimaginable. Here you are, I think 6, maybe verging on 7 years old. Your father and his brothers had done business with a lot of people from the community, and particularly with non-Jews at that time. Did your parents receive any help from anyone they knew once you were in the Socola ghetto?
As I mentioned, every individual between the ages of 18 to 50 was assigned a manual job. My mother's job was as an orderly at a hospital, to scrub floors and clean toilets. My father's job was to sweep the streets of Yash, and also on Thursdays to clean the market area. These farmers would come and sell their products, as you can see here, with horses and oxen. So his job on Thursday was to clean that market area. One day, an old farmer that my father helped a lot in the past came over to him and he said, "I'm really sorry to see you, that you have to clean after my horse. It breaks my heart. Is there anything I can do for you?" And my father said, "Some extra food will help a lot." So he went back and says, "I'm going to go back and see what can be done." The next week, when he came back to the market area, he told my father that he spoke to a few farmers in Buchum, and they're all willing to help. Keep in mind that helping Jewish people at that time was against the law, and they could have been punished very harshly. So he told my father that they got together and they decided to help us. And he said, "Here's how we're going to do that." He said, "All the farmers from the Buchum area get together in an open field and leave at midnight as in a caravan to go to the Yash market. That caravan passes the outskirts of the ghetto between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning." He says, "Be at a certain spot and look out for the last 3 wagons of that caravan, and then we'll throw something your way, because now we know where you're going to be hiding," because he told them where to stay. The next Thursday, my father woke up. He didn't say to my mother what he was planning to do. And my mother was the sensible person, and she would have realized that he's taken a chance to go out to meet these farmers, because anybody caught outside the ghetto between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning only meant that this individual is trying to flee the area and would have been harshly punished, either by imprisoned or probably even shot.
Right.
But he took the chance and go out to get a little bit extra food for us to survive. So that morning when he came back, he watched out for the 3 last wagons, and individual threw a sack his direction. He waited until they left. He looked around to make sure there's no police around. He picked up that package and he came back to the ghetto. That morning, he told us what happened. My mother was furious with him that he actually took such a risk with his life. But when he opened the sack and he took out some eggs and some cheese and some apples, and my mother saw the smile of our faces, she mellowed and she said, "Well, it actually was worth it for him to go." And from that point on, he used to go out and meet the farmer every Thursday morning. And these farmers would always throw something our way. And sometimes we would trade some of the stuff or some of the things that we got from the farmers on the black market, because there was active black market in the ghetto. And so we were trading one thing for the other and so on. So that took a long time, until one day in May of 1943, the caravan never stopped and they could be going. So my father realized there's something wrong. When he saw that farmers at the market again, the farmers told him that he can no longer help us, because there was individuals who told the police that some of the farmers are helping Jewish people, and he was afraid for his family and he couldn't help us anymore. My father thanked him, and he realized he couldn't take a chance anymore, and that was the end of the extra food that we got from the farmer.
And Nat, it's important to underscore what you said, that the risk both for your father and your family, as well as for those farmers, was great for doing that. Nat, you mentioned earlier that, of course, practicing your religion was banned. You were no longer allowed to do that. Did you still find a way to practice your faith at all?
Yes, we practice our faith in secret. We go meeting sometimes in different rooms from different houses, so to make sure that if policemen would follow us, they wouldn't know where we hold our next meeting. But that was a problem for a lot of us to practice religion, especially in the high holidays in particular. Especially also was very important for us that we could no longer go to school.
Right.
And my mother was very much a fan of the children being educated. So there was an old rabbi in the ghetto and his wife, and she kind of hired him to teach us religious studies and hired his wife to teach us secular studies. And from that, at least we got some kind of education.
We think of, just a little boy trying to have a normal life. What was it like for you as you recall?
Well, first of all, this little boy no longer had a childhood. Childhood was taken away from me. What we did was pretty much try to do whatever we needed to do. Stay in line to get our bread rations, stay in line to get our kerosene rations, and kind of be in a survival mode to survive from one day at a time.
And along those lines, Nat, you have a really important story to tell us about standing in line for that kerosene ration. Tell us about that.
Originally, my father told me to get the kerosene rations and told my sister to get the bread rations because kerosene was a little heavier to bring home. The kerosene rations was for 5 liters of kerosene, which those who do not know the metric system, it's approximately 1.3 gallons that had to last us for the entire week. So to receive these rations, we had to walk out again outside the ghetto and line up early in the morning. And we started to line up after 5 a.m. The attendant that gave us these rations used to come sometimes between 7 and 7:30. And the way they distribute that was like pretty much like today we have these gasoline stations in a booth that the attendant would be in it. So there was a line in front of this booth, and he would motion 5 people from that line that lined up to come forward. He would remove the ration coupons from that ration card and pump up the kerosene. And the way it was done was not like today, you press a button and you get all the gasoline. There was a handle in front of a box. And when you move the handle back and forth, that would bring up the kerosene into a cylinder. When the cylinder was full, this was the 5 gallons, and then he would put it down and let it put it into a can. So one day when I was waiting in line, I decided to approach this individual. His name was Grigori. I approached him. I said, "Dominic Grigori, I would like to help you." I specifically called him by the title Domnu. Domnu is really reserved for somebody very intelligent, a person with power, but he was kind of uneducated and a lazy person. So I said to him, "Dominic Grigori, I'd like to help you." And he's asking, "How are you going to help me, you little Zhidan, you little Jew?" I said, "Well, I see you might be sick. Perhaps you let me do your work for you. And for that, if it pleases you, give me a little bit of extra kerosene because I have a little sister at home. She's sick. And a little bit extra warmth will help us a lot." He didn't say anything. The next week when he came back, he looked around the line, but we were all lined up. When he saw me, he motioned for me to come forward. I came forward, and then he said to me, "Okay, little Zhidan, let me see what you can do." And it was not a big deal for a 7-year-old to move that handle back and forth. So I did gave him the ration cards. He removed the coupons, and I did the filling of the kerosene. And that day, after my job was over, he didn't give me anything. But he told me, "Next time you don't have to wait in line, but just come to the booth and wait for me here," which I did. And I did his service, I did his work, his job that particular day, didn't get anything in return. For 3 weeks, he never gave me anything. Finally, he said to me, "Little Zhidan, next week, bring an extra can." And from that point on, he used to give me an extra liter, a liter and a half. It depends how drunk he was. Sometimes he'd give me twice, so which worked out okay for me. But then little by little, we developed a little friendship between Dominic Grigori and myself. And sometimes when he had anything left over from his lunch, a chunk of cheese or a piece of cornbread, he always used to give me that and said, take that to your little sister.
Mm.
And he knew very well that probably I will share that with the rest of the family.
And Nat, I have to believe that became even especially important when the arrangement that your father had with those farmers had come to an end, as you described a little while ago. So when the farmers quit providing the food because they were fearful of the risk, how did your family then manage to get the food that you needed to eat?
Well, from that point on, we still have some money and we bought bitters. And I always said to my mother, why don't we buy certain things? Because there was a big black market that you could buy things. And my mother always used to say, you save that money for a rainy day. And I was going to tell her, Mom, it can't rain any harder than it's raining right now. So, but nonetheless, whatever we were able to get, that's pretty much what we had.
Nat, life continued in this way that you've described for about 7 months until June of 1943, when your family was no longer able to remain together in Socola. Tell us what happened to your father.
In June of 1943, big poster was posted in the ghetto that every man between the ages of 18 and 50 must report to a certain spot in the center of the ghetto to be shipped for labor in a different area. That night before my father was deported, we couldn't sleep. We cried, That morning when he was ready to leave the room, I asked him if I can walk with him to the area that he was supposed to report, and he allowed me. While we were walking, he said to me, Nat, things will get worse before they get better, but don't ever give up. And repeated that, don't ever give up. And I remember those words. We continued walking, and when we got closer to the area that he was supposed to report, he stopped and he said to me, Nat, it's time for you to go back. At that point, he turned to me, put his hand on my shoulders, and he said 5 words to me that I will remember the rest of my life. He said, Nat, take care of the girls. I could have said, I'll try or I'll do my best. Instead, I said, I'll take care of the girls, Papa, I will. I was not yet 8 years old. You can't imagine the weight of these 5 words that I had to carry on my shoulders this entire period of time that my father was deported to a forced labor camp.
No, I truly, and I think it's true of everybody who's listening to you, can't imagine that sense of responsibility that you must have felt at that particular moment. Um, did you know where your father was sent and what he was forced to do?
We didn't know exactly where he was sent. We only knew when he came back where he was. He was sent actually to a forced labor camp between Moldova and Ukraine to lay railroad tracks, new railroad tracks. As you can see in here, this is a photograph of individuals laying the railroad tracks. And if you see on the left-hand side in the ditch, there's a armed soldiers is watching over them. On the right-hand side, there's another individual that also is watching the workers. In the front, you have 2 horses and a wagon. In the front of the wagon, there's 2 individuals, soldiers, ferrying an officer in the back, probably trying to find out how the works was continuing. We also see in the right-hand side, one of the individuals on a shirt with a sledgehammer. And what they did at this point, they were bringing in big boulders. And these individuals were cracking these boulders into smaller pieces of rock. And then the smaller pieces of rock were later on broken up by smaller pieces. These individuals were on their hands and knees breaking these rocks, where these rocks were put in front or on the bottom of the railroad ties where the railroad tracks would go on. So this was very hard labor, and these individuals were working 12 and 14-hour days, 7 days a week, in very limited amount of food. So a lot of these people in my father's group passed away, died for starvation and exhaustion. Thank God my father was a strong individual, both mentally and physically, so he was able to survive this kind of a treatment. But this was very harsh labor.
For any of us who've ridden or walked on railroad tracks, understanding how important having stability and the amount of rock that it takes can appreciate the extraordinary amount of labor that must have taken to break up that rock, to lay that bed. Incredible amount of work. While your father was away doing that, did your mother hear from him? Did you know that he was alive?
He was there. We didn't hear anything from him until the war was over. We didn't know if he was alive or dead. So we were just praying and hoping that eventually he's alive and eventually will be reuniting with us.
Nat, the war ended for you when the Soviet army took control of Yash in the summer of 1944. What was it like for you and your family leading up to the liberation? And what was that period of liberation like for you when you knew that you were no longer in the same kind of danger that you had been in?
Well, to live to all this period of time, especially from the time my father left in June of 1943, was very hard. You fall into a situation where they call the surviving mode. You do robotic things normally. You try to survive one day at a time. So all of a sudden, we're here in July of 1944. The end of July, the city is starting to get bombed every night. And the longer it went into August, the city was bombed again at night until approximately the middle of August, towards the end of August, where the city was bombed constantly for 3 days. And then the bomb stopped, and all of a sudden we realized that the war is over for us at this point, and we were liberated. And we were liberated by the Russian. Things in Yash didn't improve that much better because at this point, we had more food, but that's pretty much what it was the end of it.
Yeah. Before you go on, I want to go back to the bombardment. Here you're being bombed sporadically, then daily. Just imagining the terrifying experience of having bombs dropping around you. How did you find safety or refuge during that?
Some people remained in their homes, but very few. The outskirts of the ghettos of Socola, there was a river, the Bakhlui River, and then between the Bakhlui River and the Socola area was open fields. So people were running to these open fields. They had trenches dug up, and that's pretty much how we survived in the trenches. Because the bombers were looking primarily for buildings to bomb, not open fields. So that's how most of us were able to survive the bombardment.
And you would continue under the Russians for a while longer before your father returned. When did your father return from the forced labor that he'd been enduring?
Well, once the Russian liberated us, we were, as I mentioned, we were able to go back to school. The Russians, once we were under Russian rule, the communist rule, they were still anti-Semitic. We went back to school. We were ridiculed by the children that we were older children, and we yet still have to be in first and second grade. And eventually, my father came back or reunited with us in the spring of 1945. Took him a long time.
Tell us about this photo.
Here we have my mother on the left. My father, as you can see, is very skinny because this is about 2 months after he came back from this extremely harsh labor force. We had my older sister, Sarah, myself in the middle, and my little sister, Lily. Now, when we went back to school, under the communist rule, the best children in class, the best ones who were best in class, were able to join the Pioneers, which is a communist youth group. My younger sister was the top of her class, and she was never asked to join the Pioneers, and neither was I. And that's because we were Jews. So Jews pretty much were not allowed to participate in any form of being part of the community, of the regular community.
Nat, I'm that photo that we're just looking at, you pointed out how skinny you said your father looked. In fact, when you look at the photo, his face looks narrower than your own face, which says a whole lot, I think, about what he endured. Did he talk much about what he experienced?
He talked very little, but almost none. From time to time, we spoke about various things. We spoke, for instance, what makes people do what they do. Why would a priest who's supposed to be compassionate and make sure that everything is okay with us turn us into the authorities because we were Jews? And why an old farmer risked his life and his family to help us out? And we realized one does it from the heart and one does it for monetary reasons. Eventually, my father was reunited with us. And after we were reunited, he told me that it's time for us to go back to the farm and try to set everything up to bring the family back. And while we were walking to the farm, he said to me, let's stop at that old farmer and thank him officially for all his help with all the extra food that he gave us. We stopped by there, and the old farmer was very happy to see us, and he invited us to a meal. And after the meal was over, he asked us where we are going. And we told him that we're going back to the farm. Then at that point, he told us that farm no longer belongs to you. Mm-hmm. That farm was divided into 3 sections. The priest received 1/3 of that farm, and the police officer received another 1/3 of that farm. So what happened to the priest? Now we know.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get out of Romania and finally be able to leave?
We stayed in Romania until 1947. At that point, my father realized there's no longer a future for us in Romania. So we tried to leave. The only place we could able to leave at that point was Palestine. So we filed a petition for an exit visa for Palestine. And a few months later, they came back with a big stamp on it, denied. We filed another petition, another one. So about 3 or 4 different times. And that took about 4 to 5 months to get back the results. And the results were always the same, denied. Until my mother was able to bribe the chief of police of Iași. And what she did, whatever money we had left, whatever jewelry she had, she came to him and put everything on his desk. And he said, that's all we have. Please let us leave. And he said, come back a week later. And a week later, she came and we were able to get our exit visa to Israel at that point. We arrived in Israel in April of 1950, just about a week before Passover. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nat, please. Yeah.
And I stayed there, until later on, and eventually made it after serving 3 years in an elite fighting unit in the Israeli army. Came to visit my uncle in the States, and I married here. I have 12 grandchildren, as you heard earlier. So it was a big change from what we had in 1940.
Nat, I have just in the remaining time I have just one more question for you. In the face of rising global anti-Semitism, please tell us why you continue to share your firsthand account of what you experienced during the Holocaust.
It's very important for people to hear firsthand testimony as to what happened during the Holocaust from a live person, a survivor, one who was there. All the survivors are getting older and are dying. There are many survivors who no longer have a voice because these individuals have their families murdered by the Nazis and they have no voice. It is now our duty to speak for them and to make their voice heard by us telling their stories, what happened. And I hope these things never happen again.
Nat, I wish we had more time. There's so much more you could share. That sense of responsibility that you felt as a little boy that you've described so eloquently is evident in you today as you are that voice, that powerful voice that's needed and that you're offering to the world, quite frankly. So thank you for being our first person today.
Thank you very much for listening.